Welcome to Rustler's Reminiscence, stories of hope, faith, and frontier courage. Let the journey unfold. I thought I was cutting down a dead man. For 3 days the body hung from the telegraph pole at the end of Millfield's main street, a scarecrow in boots that turned with the wind. People passed beneath without looking. I swept my store steps and tried not to hear the ropes creak working into my sleep. By the third night I knew the town wouldn't bury him. Millfield lets things rot when rotting feels righteous. They called him Thomas Creek. A placard nailed to the pole said sheriffs. Killer big enough to read from the church steps. I didn't see Sheriff Morrison when they hoisted the body. Only his shoulders turned to stone. I did see Deputy Jackson right later, and the private smile he gave a window, as if he admired himself. Before dawn I wrapped a scarf round my mouth, pocketed my father's rope knife, and walked the gray street. The man's hat was gone. His hair made a black halo. I caught his boot to steady him, and felt warmth. Not much, just the ghost of it, but enough to drop my stomach into my shoes. "Hold on," I whispered to a man who couldn't hear me. "You're not finished." I climbed the crate someone had left for a spectacle, cut the knot, and his weight fell into my arms. My shoulders screamed. The town slept. No door opened. No voice called stop. He wasn't branded on the face. Marks crusted along his ribs. Letters burned into him. I didn't read them. I hauled him to my mule cart, covered him with feed sacks, and steered up the logging road to my father's cabin. Inside, I laid him on the table my father built the winter he quit drinking. I set water to boil, tore his sheet into rags, and washed away soot and blood. He woke in jerks, a drowning man remembering air. His eyes found mine, and with a breath like paper, he said one word: innocent. "Don't try to talk," I told him, but the word had already entered the room and sat with us. I cut the rope from his neck and saw the raw bite of it. I pressed cloth to burns. Steam rose. Outside, the creek ran. Inside, it was me and a stranger as I cooked a thin broth. He swallowed in sips like each drop was a bargain. Maybe I should have ridden to Sheriff Morrison. Maybe decency meant laying him on a jail cot and asking questions in daylight. But I had watched the town teach itself a lesson at his expense. I had seen the nails in the placard, the tidy way men hammer certainty into wood. I had seen Wright's smile. By noon I bandaged what I could, and found under the grime not a monster, just a man, healer's hands, blacksmith's knuckles, a pale crescent scar near his thumb. I barred the door, banked the fire, and sat with a shotgun across my knees, listening to his breath. The longer I listened, the more innocent sounded less like a plea and more like the shape of a truth. If they came hunting, they'd find a widow stubborn enough to outstare weather and a cabin with a long memory for secrets. I told myself I was buying time until he could walk. Then I'd bring him down the mountain and let the law sort its mess. But somewhere between the first cloth and the last prayer, I quit lying to myself. I had chosen a side, and it wasn't the side with a badge. He burned through the night, too hot, then still, then jerking awake. I learned the fever the way you learn a mean horse. Water by the spoon, cloths swapped as they scalded. When I finally faced the wounds I'd avoided, my jaw locked. The letters weren't a clean brand. They were gouged, crooked, some shallow, some driven too deep. Whoever did it wanted the word more than the wound. They'd written on him and expected the town to stop thinking. Near dawn he gripped my wrist. "Not him," he rasped. "I didn't, Sarah." He slept again. I held the table until the room steadied. Sarah Morrison once bought ribbon and laughed about 3 shades of the same blue. I found willow bark powder and a thumb of laudanum. I'd sworn off since my husband coughed himself thin. I measured the drops and watched the heat loosen. I had to go for muslin, salt, and oil. I left water and the shotgun propped on a chair and took the logging road down. Millfield woke early to admire itself. The placard was gone. A splintered nail stuck in the pole. Deputy Wright rested outside the jail with his thumbs in his belt. He tipped his hat to a widow and told her he'd walk her home at dusk if she didn't spook easy. I bought muslin and needles. At my counter, Wright came in for cartridges he didn't need. "Rope knife missing from your peg, Clara?" he said, eyes on the bare hook. "Long nights make for loose inventory." He tapped where my father's knife used to hang, paid, and added lower, "World sleeps better when justice don't toss." I packed the goods and didn't breathe right until the mule hit the first hill dot back at the cabin. Thomas could take broth. "You should have left me swinging," he said. "I don't mind trouble if it cleans something." I told him my name. He gave his. When I asked about Sarah, his throat worked. "She came because I know stitches," he said. Said she tripped at the creek. It wasn't the creek. I took no more. Not the who, not the how, just the hinge where a lie meets. A bruise. Evening slid in. Coyotes yipped in the draw. The creek ran loud. I trimmed the lamp to a stingy flame and laid out muslin and thread. "We need proof," I said. "Something that won't burn off or talk itself pretty in daylight." "Won't matter," he murmured. "Men like him make proof disappear." "Then?" "We hide ours where his hands can't reach." I looked at my father's ledger with its hollowed spine, at the loose board he used when quitting whiskey. I looked at my hands, red from boiling claws, and knew I'd crossed a line. I didn't. Pray. I counted bandages, bullets, the minutes between his breaths, the distance to the jail if I had to run shouting. And I made a list. Sarah's friends. The midwife who treats bruises no one names. The livery boy who knows whose horse is wet. At midnight. And, if I could stomach it, the deputy's house. By the time the lamp hissed low, my mind had chosen Dot in the dark. His voice came like a stick stirring ashes. "If you're set on it," he said, "don't go alone." "I've been alone a long time," I told him, and blew the flame out. "Tomorrow I start asking, and I start quiet." By noon he could sit up, cruller like ash. I'd propped him with pillows and poured coffee thin enough to see the bottom. "You said Sarah came to you," I told him. She did. By Snipe Creek at dusk, dress torn where a hand had been. Said she tripped. He watched me to see if I'd buy it. Her lip had 2 splits, the old kind and the new. "I stitched her," he said. "She begged me not to light a lantern. Said someone might be following. Not a beau. Someone who could make her father deaf. I told her to tell the sheriff. She said her father loved the wrong people. Sheriff Morrison loved the town. The town loved his deputy. Love like that learns not to look. She had a book?" I asked. "A small one." Side putting words on paper kept her steady. She tucked it away when a rider stopped on the ridge and watched. Turned his horse sideways so I'd see the hint of a badge, not the badge itself. There weren't many badges in Millfield. She left before full dark, he said. Next morning 2 men kicked me awake and called me what the placard later called me. No questions. Rope first, truth never. I cleaned the groove on his throat and pictured Wright leaning on my counter, easy as a cat near cream. I pictured Sarah trying to laugh over ribbon and failing. "I'll ask the midwife," I said, "and the girl who sits beside Sarah at church." "And?" he asked. "And I'll look where a proud man hides what he doesn't want found." "Don't," he said gently. "Wright won't meet you honest. He shifts the ground. By the time you fall, the town is nodding along." "I can take nods," I lied. Grief already had a chair in my house. He tried to stand. Pain folded him. I pushed him back and fetched my father's ledger. He once hollowed its spine to hide a bottle. I slid in my list midwife church girl livery. Boy, and added one word at the bottom, diary. I set the ledger under the loose board and pressed it flat. At sundown, the drawer carried up coal smoke and soap, and that sweet smell towns have when they start forgiving themselves early. I strapped my father's knife to my calf, shrugged into my husband's dark coat, and checked the shotgun. If I miss moonrise, I told Thomas, take the mule and the upper trail. She'll fight the ford. Let her. He looked at me like a man watching a lamp walk out with the night behind it. Clara, he said, warning and blessing both, the midwife could wait. Paper couldn't. If Sarah wrote down what she couldn't, say it would sit close to the man who meant to erase it. The shortest road to proof ran past a painted porch and a good suit on a peg. When the slope turned blue and the first star showed, I walked the logging road into Millfield with my breath, counted and my pockets light. Wright's house sits 3 doors off the church. I crossed his yard like I had business, bent a hairpin, and worked the lock the way my father once kept me out of his shed. The latch gave with a soft, regretful sigh. I stepped into the dark. Somewhere in here was a girl's small book that could set a noose to smoking and a town to seeing. I closed the door with my heel and began. The deputy's house smelled of saddle soap and boiled shirts, the sort of clean a man keeps to be admired. I eased the door shut and waited until the room forgot me. Parlor, piano, glass case of spurs. A hat on a peg whose brim never met rain. The clock ticked like a throat clearing. I moved without light. Rugs swallowed my steps. The desk offered cartridges sorted by pride, receipts for charity, a Bible uncreased. Drews opened under a handkerchief and showed nothing a preacher would frown at. Men like Wright filed their sins elsewhere. In the bedroom, I found what elsewhere meant. Boots stood at attention. Under the bed, a board had one edge shaved thin. My knife fit the seam. Beneath lay a silver locket with a pressed blue flower from my ribbon drawer, Sarah's favorite shade. Beside it, wrapped in oilcloth, a small leather book. The hinge complained softly when I touched it. I slid the diary into my coat and set. The board back flat. By the parlor, a stag print hung crooked. I lifted it and met a nail polished by handling. Behind the frame sat an envelope tied with silk. I didn't open it. Proof has a weight different from paper. My hands knew it. A dog across the alley coughed once. Hooves scuffed. Keys rang. I folded into the curtain's shadow as the latch turned. Jackson Wright came in humming a hymn the church ladies liked him for. He set his hat on the peg, poured a drink, and let the house admire him. When he crossed toward the bedroom, I tucked under the piano, the strings a black forest above my head. Boots paused. His breath changed. The floorboard where I'd worked made the memory of a sound. He didn't call out. A pistol clicked. A wardrobe rattled, noise for whoever might be listening. While he made sound, I moved. Window latch up, night air in. The dog found its voice. I lobbed jerky into the alley. The bark turned to chewing. "Who's feeding my damn dog?" a neighbor shouted. Wright went to quiet them with charm laid over iron. I slid onto the rain. Barrel skidded across the awning and dropped into split wood that tried to shout and didn't. The gate hinge sang. He turned on that sound like a hawk. "Evening," he called, velvet over iron. I didn't answer. I ran. A shot bit the gutter where my head had been. Tin screamed. I cut behind the bathhouse. Another shot came dull and far. He didn't want. The sheriff awake, only the ghost off his rugs. The logging road met my feet. At the first bend, I opened the envelope. A lock of hair fell into my palm, tied with the same blue silk Sarah bought, and a note in a man's hand. Say yes, and be done with the foolishness. At the cabin, Thomas stood braced on the table, white with pain, the shotgun loose in his hands. You shouldn't be upright, I said. You shouldn't be late, he said. Did you get anything worth dying for? I set the diary down. The room changed shape around it. He looked at the lock of hair and closed his eyes like he'd been expecting it all along. Tomorrow we go to ground, I said. He knows someone was there. Does he know who? He knows enough. I barred the door. The creek kept talking. The diary sat between us like a small fire I wasn't ready to open. They came at first light. 4 riders on the ridge, 2 men on foot reading the ground. The creek told on us fresh mud where I'd washed the knife, boot prints too heavy for a widow. I heard rain metal, a laugh, and a voice too cheerful too. Be honest, that Thomas had the shotgun but not the strength. Cellar, I said. He nodded, and I lifted the apple crate trap my father built. We dropped into the cool. I eased the trap back, and smooth the rug-dot boots hit the porch. Storekeeper, a man called. Deputy Wright wants a word. The latch jiggled. Wood answered. I shoved Thomas into the crawl toward the first cave, lamp in my teeth so my hands were free. Behind us the door cracked. Men spilled in. One kicked the stove. Another said, check the table. A third checked the floor. I pulled my father's ledger from its hollow, slid Sarah's diary into the spine-proof inside, habit-tied it, and strapped it under my coat. If they find the trap, Thomas began. They will, I said. So we don't wait. We bellied into the cave, candle spit and held. Above, a curse turned into a laugh when someone found the trap. The laugh ended when the first man dropped by my boot. I dragged him into the narrow where even anger has to turn sideways. Keep moving, I told Thomas. It narrows, then opens. It did. Rock turned rough. The ceiling rose. Behind us came the scrape of boots that didn't belong underground. A shot kissed stone by my ear. The cave rang. I fired once into the dark to buy silence, and we ran bent double until the air shifted to wet leaves and the sound widened. We take the chimney to the ravine, I whispered. Then meadow trail to the railhead road. Railhead? The federal marshal keeps an office there every other week. If not today, then soon. The chimney was a stingy throat. I went first, wedging boots and back, passing up the shotgun, then the ledger, then giving Thomas my hand. We came out into ferns and lay still while the morning decided what we were. Below, the cabin caught at the corners. Men love a blaze to explain a failure. Smoke climbed, sweet with cedar. I'm sorry about your father's table, Thomas sighed. It was ridiculous and kind. Something in me loosened. We moved under cottonwoods along the deer path, slow because speed makes noise. Twice riders crossed above us. Twice the creek betrayed us. Twice we fooled it by pressing stones into. Our boot soles stamping hooves where feet should be. When the sun cleared the ridge, we reached the meadow open ground. We'd to scour tracks, no cover but being small. We'll be seen, Thomas said. Good, I said. Let them ride the obvious road while we bend off at the wash and take the old stage line. He touched the ledger under my coat. Once we hand this to a federal man, there's no taking it back. I don't want it back, I said. I want it read out loud. We stepped into the meadow. Far off a rider turned his horse sideways to mark us. I didn't lower my eyes. Behind us the cabin burned. Ahead, grass leaned toward a place where law might still mean something. We kept walking, the book hot against my ribs and a man at my shoulder, daring the open to carry our names. The meadow lay like a clean sheet, wind carrying our words. Riders gathered on the rise. Jackson Wright broke from them and reined in 10 paces off, his horse stepping for show. 4 men spread to bracket us. You've had a lively morning. Mrs. McKinnon, he called. House fire's an ugly accident. Some accidents strike matches, I said. I held up the iron star I'd taken from his drawer, the spare badge he wore when he wanted light to notice him. Deputy, you dropped this, he smiled. You broke into my home. You broke into a dead girl's life, I said. Sarah? Morrison kept a diary. She wrote how you waited under her window, how you told her to say yes and be done with the foolishness. Shame you don't have the book, he said. I don't, I said, letting the bluff sit. But I've enough to reach the railhead and ask a federal man. Why? Millfield lets its deputy pick his own cases and his own women. He laughed for his men. Railhead's a long walk for a widow, and what is he, exactly? Alive, Thomas said, stepping from the cottonwoods, gray but standing, Sarah's diary square in his hands. Hear her, he said, and read, June 12th. He came to the back door again. Said a smart girl does not shame a man who serves the town. I told. Him no. He said no won't hold. Silence widened. A man spat. Another lowered his gun by a hair. Wright arranged himself into the shape the town had hired. The sheriff's girl fancied herself a poet. Put a young lady's diary next to a rope and folks hear what they want. Thomas read again, shorter and colder. July 3rd. He said he makes problems go away. Said if I cried in the wrong place it would kill my father. Show them the note, I said. Blue ribbon, lock of hair. Say yes and be done with the foolishness. Wright's bay sidestepped. His hand touched the idea of his gun and left it. A woman steals trinkets and wants to string a man with poetry. Answer plain, I said. Where were you? The night she went to Snipe Creek? Ask your horse. He came home wet. Joe from the livery spoke before he could stop. Deputy, your sorrel was lathered at midnight. I curried him. Thought it odd you used the alley gate. 2 seconds is how. Long it took Wright to hate the boy enough to forget the smile, and to see the circle of ears was smaller than he'd planned. She said yes, he lied. Thomas closed the diary like shutting a wound. She said no. You wrote the yes on her. Wind laid the grass down. Wright looked at his badge in my hand, then at the men who were no longer quite with him. He didn't confess like a man in church. He confessed like a man who still thinks the room is his, and is surprised to find windows. I gave her chances, he said. A girl like that brings trouble when she don't learn. The words dropped like a stone into a well. You could feel when they hit bottom in the faces around him. Jackson, one of his men said, no title. For the first time since Millfield hoisted a rope, I felt the ground tilt our way. Wright heard his own words ringing wrong and reached for bluster, like a man reaching for a coat in a house already on fire. Boys, he said, soft as feed corn, we're not letting a thief and a drifter tell Millfield who it is. His hand slipped easy as habit toward the pistol he'd been trying not to touch. Jackson, Joe said again, smaller now, don't. I saw the moment the deputy chose. It wasn't a draw so much as a punishment. He leveled the gun past me at the boy who'd spoken out of turn. I didn't think. I moved. I threw the badge like a coin. It flashed, and his horse flinched, and my shotgun came up with a comfort I hadn't wanted to remember. The first blast tore the air high. His shot went wide and stripped bark from a cottonwood dot then. Everything broke. Men who'd spread to pin us and jerked sideways to face one another. Someone yelled, "Guns down!" and someone else heard guns up, and the meadow exploded into dust and thunder. Horses screamed. The law in Millfield, such as it was, spun apart like a cheap rope under weight. Thomas went to ground with the diary under his chest and his hands over his head, like a man sheltering a fire against wind. I dropped behind a fallen trunk and worked. The second barrel. Wright slid from his saddle, rolled, and came up grinning the way some men grin at a bar fight. He wanted the chaos. It made him king again. He fired where Thomas had been. I shot where he was going. The pellets chewed dirt at his boots. He laughed, low and mean, and cut toward the livery boy. "Mouths make trouble," he said. Joe froze then. Deputy Carver, the oldest of Wright's men, put a round into the ground between Wright and the boy. "Enough," Carver said, voice shaking like a fence in wind. "You said she'd lied." "She did lie," Wright snapped, "and that, more than the shots, did it." Two men who'd ridden up with him lowered their pistols to the grass like they were setting down hot irons. A third took one stumbling step backward and kept going. Wright saw his hold slip and went feral. He grabbed Joe by the collar and dragged him half behind as a shield, barrel at the boy's ear. "Every last one of you put your guns where I can. See them," he ordered, "or I start fixing loose tongues." I stood slow, hands out, shotgun low. "Let him go," I said. "Take me instead. I'm the one with your house under my nails." "Don't, Clara," Thomas hissed from the grass. Wright's eyes flicked, the calculation of a man who keeps lists. He shoved Joe away and came for me fast, gun swinging up, intention plain and close. I saw the small scar by his mouth, and the place where a beard never quite grew, and the care he took with his hair, and thought, how much polish it takes to cover rot. The shot that saved me didn't come from my gun. Carver's second bullet hit Wright in the shoulder and spun him. Mine hit an instant later, because habit remembered what mercy didn't. He staggered. Rage doing the job blood no longer could. He brought the pistol up one last time. Teeth bared, and the third round, nobody's sure who's took him through the throat. He sat down, surprised, as if the ground had pulled a chair for him, and bled into the clean grass. Silence arrived in jagged pieces. A horse without a rider ran a circle and checked itself. Someone sobbed once and choked it off. I heard Thomas's breath and the paper crackle of a pressed flower under leather. Wright coughed pink and tried to say something righteous. What came up wasn't words. He looked at me like I'd stolen his future, and I looked back and didn't give it. I stepped closer because I wanted him to see the person who'd cut down a man the town left for dead, and then refused to be quiet. She said no, I told him, because some truth should be the last thing a man hears. His eyes went to the diary under Thomas's arm, and then to the sky that didn't care. Whatever prayer or curse he had left stayed behind his teeth. His hand twitched once toward the gun he'd dropped. Carver put his boot on it and, after a beat that measured out a life, nudged it away. Men who had called him deputy a quarter hour earlier stood with their hats in their hands and their mouths full of dust. "I ain't going to prison over you," one muttered to his boots. Joe touched his ear like he expected it to be gone, and then looked at me with a gratitude that made my knees remember. They were just bones. I found Thomas. The diary had a crease where a stray bullet had kissed the cover and failed to do more than bruise. He turned it over like a mother checking a child. "Still whole," he said, and only then did his hands begin to shake. "We go back," I said. My voice sounded like someone who'd been awake for a year. "We walk into town by the front street. We put this in the sheriff's hands, and we say the names out loud." Carver swallowed. "I'll ride ahead," he said, not looking at Wright. "Sheriff needs to hear it from more'n one mouth." "Bring a wagon," I said, because dead men also have to be accounted for. I looked at Wright for the last time and felt nothing I needed to keep. Thomas stood with my arm under his. The meadow smelled of crushed grass and powder, and the first honest fear I'd seen on those men's faces. We started walking. Behind us, someone covered the deputy's face with his own clean coat. Ahead, Millfield waited with its doors and its choices. I carried the badge in my pocket and the ache in my shoulder and felt, for the first time since the rope's creak woke me, that the ground might hold. We walked in by the front street, not sneaking, not running. Folks tilted in doorways the way people do when they want to witness righteousness without catching any of the smoke. Carver met us at the jail with his hat mashed flat in his hands. "Sheriff's waiting," he said. "Brought the church ladies and half the board besides." His voice tried for steady, and Mist. Sheriff Morrison stood behind, his desk like a man who'd lost the map and finally admitted it. He looked older than he had yesterday. When Thomas set the diary down, the sheriff didn't touch it at once. He reached for a handkerchief, wiped both hands slowly, then opened the leather as if it might be hot. He read for a long time. Pages whispered. Outside, a wagon creaked and someone shushed a baby, and the town held its breath, the way a town does when it's deciding what sort of place it's going to be next. The sheriff's lips moved on certain lines. When he reached the blue ribbon and the lock of hair, his throat worked, and he had to sit. "She wrote everything," he said to no one. "God help me, she kept trying to tell me by standing right in front of me." I expected anger or a hunt for new villains. What came out of him was plainer and heavier. "I let him be the part of the town I didn't want to see," he said. "I called it faith. It was laziness." He closed the diary and lifted his eyes to Thomas. "I'm not asking forgiveness. I'm asking what comes next." "Start with truth," Thomas said, voice rough. "Say it out loud. Then take my name. Off that pole." We took it out onto the steps because truth kept behind walls turns thin. Carver read from the diary. The sheriff said Wright's name, and then said his own. A mother sobbed. The livery boy put a hand on the post where Thomas had hung and stared like he could see the boards that had grown out of it. "Thomas Creek is cleared," the sheriff said, and his voice cracked on the second word. "He never harmed my daughter. He tried to help her. I will put my badge behind anybody who says otherwise." The sound that followed wasn't applause. It was something quieter, like a tired gear catching, like a door eased off swollen hinges. Men who'd hammered that placard stared hard at their boots. Mrs. Potts crossed the street and pressed a wrapped loaf into my hands. "You'll both eat," she said. That practical frontier love that forgives by feeding Dot. We buried Jackson right that afternoon, because that's what you do with problems you can't pretend aren't there. The sheriff stood graveside without speaking, hat in. His hands. When the dirt thudded, I felt something in me ease that had been tight since the rope first creaked. That evening the sheriff came by my store with Carver and a ledger that wasn't my father's. "Every case Wright touched," he said. "We open them. We write letters to the marshal and to towns he rode through. We say what we did and what we failed to do. If I can't keep this badge clean, I'll hand it to somebody who can." "Start with the girls," I said. "Ask the midwife what she knows. She's been keeping the town's secrets, so the town keeps pretending it has none." He nodded like a man chewing glass and said he would. Thomas followed me home. Not to the cabin wore smoke like a coat, but to the back room of the store where the sacks of flour looked like small snowdrifts. He stood at the workbench, touching my father's tools as if they were skittish animals. "You don't owe me a bed," he said. "You don't owe me breathing," I said, and surprised us both with the softness in it. We built a new table out of the old ones saved. Planks. He planed and I sanded. Shavings curled to the floor like pale ribbons. When we set the top and the light caught the grain, he smiled for the first time without pain, twisting it. "I had a table once," he said. "Sold it to pay a doctor who didn't save my sister. Then we'll keep this one," I said. "We'll even eat at it regularly. That's my plan for justice." Later, on the porch, the town sounded like itself hammering. A fiddle in somebody's kitchen. A horse complaining about a saddle cinched too tight. Sheriff Morrison passed, raised a hand. He looked smaller, which might be the start of him. Growing right. Joe the livery boy waved with both hands, like he was proving he still had them. Thomas leaned against the post and watched dusk pull the color out of the street. "You could have walked past me," he said. "I could have," I said, "but then I'd have had to live with the sound of that rope. I don't sleep easy as it is." He laughed, not proud, just relieved. "You think the town will keep choosing, right?" "No," I said. "I think it will keep choosing easy unless somebody stands in the way. Sometimes that'll be the sheriff. Sometimes it'll be us. Sometimes it'll be a boy who won't shut. Up at the wrong time." He touched the scar wringing his throat, and then my sleeve, like he was making sure both were real. "You staying?" "I live here," I said. He looked at the road that led away, and then at the table through the window, and back at me. "Then I suppose I do too, for a spell." We stood there a while in the easy dark. No trumpet, no grand vows, just the promise of tomorrow's chores and the work of telling the truth when it's least convenient. Somewhere beyond the ridge, the creek kept talking. I listened, and for the first time in a long time, heard something that sounded like rest. Thanks for riding with us through another tale from the Old West. If this story touched your heart, don't forget to like the video and subscribe. More adventures are waiting on the trail ahead. See you next time.